Welcome to Martechify, a community of marketing professionals interested in digital marketing, Martech, and AI. I am your host today, Ekaterina Konovalova, and I'm excited to welcome to this conversation Dr. Denise Rousseau, who is a professor of organizational behavior and public policy at Carnegie Mellon University. Welcome, Dr. Rousseau.
Thank you, Ekaterina. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, I'm so excited to talk about your research. But first, let's talk about what inspired you to pursue your career.
That's it's very personal, but my father hated his job. And I was originally going to college. I'm the first one to go to college in my family. I was going to be an archaeologist because I was a romantic teenager. And one day I picked up my dad around Thanksgiving, picked him up from work, and he was just so depressed about what had happened on the job. And I was taking a course in industrial psychology, and the light bulb went on in my head, and I said, okay, I'm going to study how do we make people's jobs and work lives better. Honest to God, that was the moment.
Nice. And from there, a PhD, lots of research, and wonderful Carnegie Mellon.
Yes, absolutely. I was an undergraduate at Berkeley, and I was fortunate to get to be a doctoral student there. And when you go to Berkeley, you get your education everywhere in the university. You just don't focus on one department. And it was just fascinating to me to, go from sociology to engineering to business school and back to psychology and see their very different takes on work. And one of the things that's been inspiring to me is to take a more interdisciplinary view of the work experience, how executives and managers think, because roles really dictate perspective and how they key on the problems. And I was looking for a way to integrate the different sides. So you need some shared frame of reference to solve problems. And that's when I hit on the notion of a psychological contract, which is an implied view on the part of individuals, could be the manager, could be the employee, and what they believe to be their exchange, their deal, what it's about. What do I owe you? What do you owe me in return? And we find that that evolves over the life course of an employee in a company. And actually that employers, collectively have notions of what the contract is, what signals they try to send by offering a promotion, what signals they try to send by changing the performance standards and maybe removing some people from the organization. What are they looking for? But the idea that the parties think about their exchange as a personal contract is real. I see it repeated over and over. And recently we've been studying contractual thinking in South Asia, and it's different than in the West because of hierarchy, but still people form a belief about obligation. And that to me has been the basis of many inquiries, because part of what makes us social is our sense of the need to contribute to each other.
Absolutely. It's this give and take. And as you mentioned, Asian culture, especially in Japan, it's common that there's an expectation you'll work for a company for a lifetime, but then you'll work very long hours. In France, you were finished at 5 p.m. and au revoir, right? And in the US, the contract could be that, well, we need to get it done at 10 p.m. or on your vacation or on the weekend. So all those different norms definitely vary culturally, but let's talk about what's going on in the United States, especially in marketing and tech. And I would love to learn more about what you've seen with social contracts since the pandemic hit, then when people were asked to return to offices, and what is happening now with the age of AI and many layoffs that are happening right now.
I think I'd focus on two very different aspects of that whole situation you described. The first is, of course, the incredible churn that has occurred in organizations as, global instability, the disrupted supply chains, things needed to be reforged in order for businesses to function. Organizations are a lot more interdependent than they might have thought of themselves before. And that has really, that has made some fascinating issues. Number one, a lot of the flexibility has been, I will say, paid for by employees needing to make adjustments in how they work without a lot of training or support. Training and development have really taken a hit. post-COVID in the sense that organizations have less in-house development. If they have training, it's very tactical to learn these particular tasks, skills, technology, as opposed to career building broader skills. So that sends a message right there that the planning cycle is much shorter, that what we need from you today may not be what we need for you 6 months from now. And it's much harder then for employees to figure out the future. That when you could have planned before over 3 years, you might plan now for 6 months. So that shift in how people think about time and activity is very important. At the same time, I think their employers have moved from thinking about 3 years to 5 years to 6 months. And you have a lot less slack when you need to do things quickly in a short period of time. You build less, you acquire more rather than develop. And that has real implications for how companies and workers interact and how an employee who has goals about development or building skills, whether or not it's likely they can achieve that in the same employer if the employer has short-term deliverables in a short planning cycle. So that's been quite a difference from the second decade in this millennium. The other thing, I'm so glad you asked about this, is the shift back from remote to in-office work. That's an ideological shift, I think, on the part of many employers, by which I mean they had some existing beliefs that were not necessarily tested by science or running their organizational data, but we see it basically disrupting in the workplace. For many people, certainly for knowledge workers, being remote was not so bad. I personally had a wonderful COVID. I stayed in my kitchen and I taught my classes. Well, and that's unique to maybe being a professor. But it taught employees, I can get things done. I can set up my life here and not commute, and I can coordinate with people because I have those social skills and I have the technology. But I think it was much harder for managers and senior executives to shift their practices to managing people they don't see. And that's an issue because as employees changed how they worked, one of the questions that I've often asked leaders is, did you change how you managed? And they kind of look at me a little dumbfounded. And I thought, that's a lost opportunity. We're going to send a man to the moon. There's going to be remote work. If there's going to be a team on the moon, we got to think about how do we set this up? And I'm only being a little facetious, but we found that the quality of personal life and non-work work conflict, quality went up, conflict went down. People liked it. And now to be required to go back because it makes managers comfortable and they don't have good evidence that people work better. We've done a series of what we call them rapid evidence assessments, my colleagues and I at the Center for Evidence-Based Management. And we've looked at what the research says, pre-COVID, post-COVID, on the quality of work, productivity, work-life conflict of remote workers in these two different phases. And what we find is that both objective and subjective performance and productivity go up, work-life conflict declined, and people's willingness to stay with the organization if it offered remote work went up. But on the employer side, the perspective is radically different. Number one, they didn't really measure productivity in an objective way. They measured it subjectively, so they can't really tell if people were less productive at remote than they were on the job, were in a building. But there's a lot of pressure because managers can't see people. It makes them uncomfortable. They haven't been trained or haven't thought through how to manage remotely. Certainly some are very good at it, but they learn by themselves. Senior leaders have a hard time with the notion that they are executives without people around them kind of reaffirming that role. Plus, they have real estate that they've invested in, long leased, or my God, maybe they own the facility. That's a pressure to justify in our society. Well, I have this resource and I'm not using it. People really should come back in. So the research evidence says people first don't coordinate so well once they're remote. They have to learn. But employees mostly are smart. They do learn. Coordination catches up to where it was before going remote. But managers' anxiety about managing doesn't decline. And I think that's on the organization to build the kind of skills for feedback, coordination, performance review, etc., in a remote environment. And I've asked, I can find virtually no organization that has actually developed managers to engage in that. And so I'm putting out the call. If you're such an organization, contact me at Carnegie Mellon because I'd love to sing your praises.
Wonderful. How interesting. And is it fully remote, 5 days a week remote, or you looked at hybrid approach as well?
We looked at both because the literature comes variously. So you're taking all the published studies that have been done since 2010 and then comparing them to the studies after COVID hit. And that's kind of how you see the pattern. There's a mix. I do think that there is some evidence that hybrid is very attractive to people because it's also the case that employees do enjoy the presence of others. Not everybody can go hybrid because maybe they have a house in another state or they have family reasons to locate where they are. But I think hybrid is a good compromise for employers who need the assurance of the presence of people, for employers who want to develop their people and build a tighter bond to the organization. That's probably a good reason to do it. I would just say don't waste the time. Once people are in the office, develop them, build coordination capabilities. Just don't treat it like another day because that's a wasted opportunity. But there is benefit of hybrid, and it's calming for managers to feel that they are able to communicate in their preferred way with people, which is often face-to-face.
Yes. And did you find that sweet spot for the perfect number of days for hybrid schedule?
I'm afraid not. Yeah, most of the organizations we looked at were 3 and 2, 3 remote, 2 in. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's best. That just means that was what was tried in the company. So your sweet spot, I think, it could be particular to the organization, but I think that's a good practice evidence question for practitioners to see if they can assess what's optimal
Interesting.
for their organization.
Yes. And have you studied companies that switched to a 4-day work week, such as Buffer? I know a few others, or a lot of European companies also implemented. So have you looked at that data?
Well, the interesting thing with 4-day work weeks is this. Is it a compressed 4-day or is it a 4-day work week with reduced hours? So, when you're in Norway and you show up after 4 o'clock in an office, everybody's gone, which I had to discover that in Oslo. But the idea being that they're already reducing the number of hours. So a little bit of history. So we go back to 1910 and manufacturers. Our Manufacturer Association decided that they would depart from the 6-day or 5.5-day work week that was common in manufacturing previous to that. And they would try the 5-day work week because of issues of having to start equipment and things on the Saturday that was only a half day and all those matters. And it turned out that productivity increased as they shortened the work week. During World War II, natural experiments occurred for a variety of reasons. Changes were made in the kinds of schedules for production, in part because the workforce was at war, and the workforce was more often women and older men. So they reduced the work hours in different fashions. And what has been consistently found, so put this in your hat and think about it, is that as the work week shortens, labor productivity goes up. Now, this isn't to say everybody could do in one day what they do in 5. But what I'm saying is, especially as our technology changes and our workforce becomes more skilled, what we find is that productivity, if it's in a compressed space that people have supports to work in, can be sustained. If the goals are clear, people understand what the outputs are expected to be, they will work effectively in a shorter work week. For example, the 4 work week, even the 32 hour work week. I would not expect labor productivity decline, particularly with the right preparation. We also have to think about the fact that we have a 5-day work week that was developed in manufacturing. Now we don't do so much work in manufacturing. And that is very important because we learn about the physical demands of work. We're more often than not talking about the psychological and social demands of work. And the evidence would say that some compression, or at least a reduction in the number of days, could be implemented without meaningful loss in labor productivity. But again, we have this issue. It's difficult for managers to think about. They have a physical plant that's not being used. My colleagues we have an office of the future at Carnegie Mellon. It's atop the Margaret Morrison building. Used to be a women's college. Now it's a school of architecture. And they innovate with regard to the setup for work, communal space. I hear they have very good coffee there too. There's a barista. I think the barista is the director. But in any case, it's an innovative space to try restructuring work so that they can see the effect of a change in lighting, a change in space, a change in proximity in the office to your peers. And I would encourage organizations to think like an experimenter, to see, okay, do a pilot test to see what would it take to, let's say, drop a day a week with one group and see what performance would be like. What were the pain points? Could these be overcome? Is it an issue of design? Is it an issue of expectation? That's something that our Office of the Future looks at. I don't see that many organizations with that experimental attitude. COVID made us experiment. We already kind of know a little of how to do that. I suggest that either with a university or on one's own resources in an organization, that's well worth the effort to find, in your lovely words, the sweet spot.
Yes, and I'm curious to hear more about what that center found in terms of proximity or lighting. I know there are some experiments with, let's say, the color of the walls, and the red will make you work real hard, but then people get really tired. So all the subtle differences make a huge impact on people's well-being and productivity. So can you think of any quick examples?
The one that I know of, because it impressed me, is the one that had to do with the ambient air. And so they actually had an arrangement whereby people could change the airflow in their workspace. And the workspace could be pretty small, like a workstation, but it had a positive effect on people because our comfort level with regard to the environment is very particular. What you like and what I like, do I like it cold? Do I like it warm? Do I like the air moving? Do I like it still? What's the pressure of air movement I should have? That customization turns out to be valuable to people in terms of their ability to focus. Maybe it keeps them from wandering around the building because they're uncomfortable. Personally, I think a little wander during your day is good for you, is good for your health. But those are features like the air and the environment and its movement, as well as the sound proofing or the sound availability. There's a large literature on it. Not my area of expertise, but environmental design for the office is a published literature. If you listen to what I suggest, and I'm happy to provide my opinion, if I'm looking for evidence on a question and I want peer-reviewed literature and I want it fast, I would go to Consensus AI and I would ask my question, and they will only pull up peer-reviewed literature, not somebody's opinion, not a posting somewhere. So Consensus AI, I suggest to the managers listening in this interview, they check it out and get quality evidence. That was my
Yes,
plug.
thank
I
you.
don't work for them, but I use them, and I am very appreciative that they exist.
Yes, thank you for this recommendation. So we're not learning from Instagram Reels, we're learning from actual scientists who are
You
validating the
got
data
it.
and some. Yeah, yes. So let's talk about your research. I know you have an interesting article about the leadership changes in the era of AI and how leaders, and you touched a little bit on management style and how COVID changed our work and how it gave some anxiety to managers who are used to seeing people in person. And now, to make things even more difficult, AI came into play. And now, pretty much everyone I know is using their own AI agent. And we switched search from Google to ChatGPT and other tools. So, what is happening in the leadership space and where are we headed? And any pointers to our Martech leaders that they can take notes and implement in their work?
Okay. So, there's diverse types of leadership styles. And perhaps even more importantly, there are diverse types of values leaders live, not just the spoken, but the actually practiced values. And the evidence is pretty clear that even though a leader might be remote, not day to day in contact with the workforce, that they set a tone that is incredibly important. I do feel that there has grown to be a mistrust in leadership for a couple of reasons. And I want to talk about the antidotes to that, because to be a trustworthy leader, that's a currency that has incredibly high value. And if you lose that trust that others place in you, it's very hard to restore. So the issue here is the use of explanations for why we do what we do. Many companies say, well, we're going to cut the workforce because of AI. The research evidence suggests AI is not contributing substantially in any way to reductions in force, but AI is something the public fears, and leaders use it as an explanation of what they're doing when they're really doing it for cost, or they want to make a change and they don't want to do it with their current workforce, or they don't have the management capability down the rank to bring the workforce along. But AI has become the boogeyman. And I think it's unfortunate, because all the evidence that I know of with regard to its effect on the workplace is that AI is an incredibly enabling tool. It's a tool. It's not an assistant. It's a tool when you have a workforce with expertise, because it helps the expert think more broadly and use his or her judgment more effectively. It's not so good for the less informed, lower skilled workforce, because they can't tell the difference in the quality of what's being offered to them by AI. And so I would really suggest that one of the issues is the leaders who make a difference and who build trust develop their people. For every year I work for you, I should be more valuable in my life and in my job. How do we make that happen? Well, the more knowledgeable I am about my work, the more expert I am in whatever specialty or activity I work on, AI will be more useful to me, because my line of inquiry will be more effective. I can actually ask questions that give me insight, not an answer, an insight. So my own judgment is better. And I'll give you an example. Turns out this is a personal example. My daughter, I have identical twins. One's a chemist and the other is not. They are really different. Chemists are different. The chemist, very good at what she does, was working on a substance that she was trying to purify and make work. Couldn't get it to work. She was just so concerned. Maybe it's contamination, because chemists always think the problem is, something's contaminated. That's why it's not working. They're used to that as a problem. But she tried, let's say it's Claude. I don't know what AI she used. And she said, here's my problem. What could be going on? And the AI said to her, well, have you thought about the issue, not about impurities, because that's always a thing they think about in chemistry. Have you thought about the concentration of the particular, it was a DNA material that she was trying to get to perform well? Because concentration can make a difference to its performance. And she went, I knew that. She has a PhD in chemistry. She's been practicing for 20 years. But I had not thought, I was so focused on impurity, I had not thought about concentration. That expanded her judgment out of the bias of our own thinking. That proved to be the solution to the problem department had been working on for 3 weeks. That, in my mind, is a superb example of how AI can be a tool for better judgment. So, but thinking about, from the leadership perspective, how do we give our employees and staff tools to be better at what they do? Not replace something that they valued in doing, but help what they value doing be more effective. And that comes from really being concerned about the values you're creating in your workforce, the development of your people. One of the issues I think that contemporary leaders might take on as a task is a problem that we see in the last maybe 10 years. The declining level of expertise in organizations. And when I mean expertise, I'm not talking experience, because anybody can have time. Expertise is for the work you have done. Have you grown and learned? Have you become a better problem solver? Are you more adaptive in your thinking about the area you work in? Are your outputs and outcomes more effective? Higher decision quality, higher practice quality. To develop expertise, you need time in an area of practice that you keep learning. Exposure to different situations so you reflect and get feedback. Oh, here's how that works. And in that way, you grow this deeper knowledge. It is incredibly satisfying to people to have expertise. All of a sudden, you have this capacity that's kind of distinctive for you. It lets you be more valuable to others. But when you're moving from job to job, or you lose a job and have to start somewhere else, that's not a very effective path for growing deep knowledge in a domain or an area. It's not a good path even for learning how to adapt your expertise to new situations, because working in a path and then being exposed to other people with different problems, then you deepen your adaptive capability with regard to your expertise. So I would challenge leaders to keep their workforce together long enough to become more expert. Support them so that the tasks and situations they work on and the skills they develop build on each other, because it's satisfying for the person and it's incredibly valuable to the organization, because it's not so easy to go out on the market and acquire expertise, especially because many companies can't tell the difference between somebody who's an expert and somebody who's got a lot of years on the job. Those are two very different states, because many times the person with a lot of experience has, let's say, 10 years, 1 year of the same experience repeated 10 times. It's not expertise.
That's a good point. And do you have that sweet spot for employer? How long should they keep that expert to have enough time to deepen the expertise, assuming that they are advancing and not just doing the same thing every year?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the issues is the notion of job progression. And I'm not necessarily always meaning promotion. I'm thinking about the nature of the work that people are exposed to. So one of the issues is think in terms of 3 to 5 years and beyond, not 1 or 2, because you're still sussing things out. The expertise goes from novice, they have basic information, but not very adaptive, to an intermediate who they know now a lot of the typical things that happen in this work area, to an expert who not only knows the general features about what works, but they know how to adapt their knowledge to new circumstances because they have a deeper understanding of the underlying processes and the information that they need to make a better decision. All of our evidence would say that that's at least to become an intermediate, like 3 to 5 years. To become an expert, add on to that. In the accelerator of developing expertise is this: exposure to diverse kinds of problems and situations where the individual can practice with or without others, get feedback on what works, reflect and grow. So what we would like to see is exposure to varied circumstances, because that builds capability. Because somebody who's interested in learning will build out that brain space where their expertise becomes knowledge that is more and more connected and effectively accessed. Because when you develop expertise, you're changing your brain. So we're keeping people long enough in a job so that their brains become more fluent in the area that they prize working in, or the area the company values a competency in. I think that's an important question, because that comes with practice and experience in a domain, and it just doesn't happen in a year or 2.
Yes, yes. And you have so many interesting articles about loyalty and how it's a double-edged sword when people are let go in a mass email, right? Where they feel so disoriented and no loyalty to the company. Same with managers, where they may be asked to reduce workforce by 10% no matter at any cost, which is also a very tough decision. So let's talk about loyalty a little bit and what's going on with loyalty these days.
Loyalty is it's one of the highest indicators of quality in a relationship, because loyalty often says, even if it's not in my interest, I will support you. But in the long term, loyalty, it's there because it's mutually beneficial, not just one-sided. Loyalty is fascinating because there's so many ways in which people contribute in their work that you can't prescribe. You just can't give people a checklist and say, do these 10 things today just like this. Because things come up. Because what it takes to do those 10 things requires special knowledge, tacit insight. What you get with loyalty is a focus of attention on doing things that actually support the relationship. You don't have to pre-specify so much when loyalty exists in a relationship. Critical aspect of loyalty, a two-sided part for the employer. I'm going to build on the notion that you just raised about laying people off in emails. So I'm saying this in this interview, and you can take it to the bank. Like I think that was a character on a television show years ago. Take to the bank. If you want to manage your workforce in a quality way, if you want to be a respected and respectable leader, never, ever, ever announce bad news in an email. Never, never, ever lay people off in an email. It is a sign of incompetence on the part of the leadership. Maybe it's their own fear and ambivalence about having to confront an adverse decision, but that's your problem. They pay you big money not to do things because they're easy for you. Emails are devastating to people because they are one-sided communications. Typically, when they're broadcast broadly to a workforce, there has been absolutely no preparation. Am I saying you can't talk about bad news in an email? No. But there's a precursor. There is, just like in development campaigns and in political campaigns, there's a pre-campaign for an announcement that would go out in an email. And so the critical issue is you have conversations with people. It should not be a surprise to their managers. Their managers should be talking with their employees. There should be some sort of guidance on interpersonally what should be said. And then the email is confirmation of what this communication program that you've had. And you say, well, I didn't have time. We had to do this all this week. You didn't have Monday? You didn't, if you're going to announce it on Tuesday, you didn't do, what could you do on Monday? The email will reduce the odds that you can ever restore a trustworthy relationship with this workforce or workforces down the road. It is disrespectful. It is lazy. And it is so easy to have that form the basis of rumor and gossip and backstabbing stories. In my first book on psychological contracts, I wrote about an organization, a bank that announced something pretty devastating in an email. And what was described as I was gathering information about this is if I talked to a dozen people, they had like 18 different interpretations of what was really going on. And why are they telling us this now? And did they know before and they didn't want to talk about it? Is all you're breeding is suspicion in addition to the incredible harm that people are dealing with by what losses that adverse email brings to them. The pre-communication campaign, even if it's only a day or two, says you care. It says you're thinking about them. It also says that you're interested in the long-term standing of your relationship with your workforce, this workforce or the next one. So I really urge people in organizations from HR up to prepare the community of employees and managers when bad news needs to be given. And best if you can do it with facts that are real as opposed to facts that are made up. So every time somebody says AI caused this, I go, it's really not very likely that it's having that kind of pervasive effect. It's an easy out. And easy outs are hardly the way to build trustworthy relationships or to be the kind of leader who people will trust over time, because that reputation will stick with you. That adverse reputation will stick with you if you behave in this way.
So just to clarify, what is the correct way to bring bad news?
There are a variety of ways to do it. So how big are we? Are we distributed worldwide? Are we headquartered in Pittsburgh and everybody's here? So geography makes a difference. But one of the things I think is very important, if we're in the same place, is we have an all-hands meeting. We pull people together. Or if we have to do it across shifts, we have several all-hands meetings. We talk about it together with people in the room, and then we confirm it in the email. The email is confirmation. Did he really say that? Yeah, he did. It's in the email. If you don't do this, people will bring all the adverse memories, their own fears and anxieties, probably the very fears and anxieties that caused the company to give emails in the first place, as opposed to preparing communication. Employees will bring that baggage to the email, and it will do more damage than it needed to do, and causes much more harm, because then people are having conversations with each other that cause them to question their history with the company. The idea would be is you can make a communication plan. So you decided on Sunday you had to do this, so it has to be fast. Okay, on Monday, these are the talking points. The leaders go wherever the leaders need to go. It would be better if they did sort of like not Zoom kind of conference, video conferences globally. And the advantage of this, to make sure everybody gets the message, is people can then ask you questions. Understanding is so much better when the communication is two-way than it is one-way. Two-way communication, even if sometimes they're venting, and I don't blame them for venting. You probably don't blame them for venting, which is why you sent the email in the first place, because you were afraid of the venting, is you absorb it. You talk about it. You explain why. You treat them respectfully. That's a plan. It can be done in a day. It doesn't have to be. So the idea that, we had to do it fast, that does not cut mustard. That doesn't really make sense. If you have advance notice, you can actually do it in a much kinder, more effective way. It's a way in which I've seen it done in my university, because though we have campuses everywhere, I can talk about what happens in Pittsburgh, is the provost will go around, or representatives of the administration will go around and meet with faculty and staff in groups. Perfectly reasonable. And then something is codified in a formal document. Much more respectful, and also it shows courage and care, and that you're making decisions that stand the test of questioning and inquiry. I believe the email is sent out of fear. And I said, no. Everybody has the same anxieties. Confront them relationally, and the outcome will be stronger relationships going forward, and also a better reputation for the leadership or the organization, as the case may be.
Yes, thank you for these pointers. Do you have any other suggestions, ideas for Martech leaders, how they can be effective leaders, communicators, adapt to new environment and thrive and help their teams grow as well as their companies grow?
What I think is perhaps the most valuable contribution that leaders can make to their own development and their firm is to improve the quality of the information and evidence they use in the decisions they make and they share with their employees. For all these databases and scorecards and dashboards, it remains a critical issue that decisions be made on trustworthy evidence. And trustworthy evidence is not just one source. It's not just numbers. So over the last 20 some years, I've been working with many others in the evidence movement to improve the quality of the decisions that are being made and the quality of the processes that organizations have for getting facts and information. And I'm going to give you the 4 sources of evidence that we have found to be most important in management and organizations. You may have others, and I respect that because the world's dynamic. First is, of course, good quality organizational data. Do you have, kind of some sort of whole house database where you have information on performance and headcount and employee development, so you're not making assumptions that you can't back up. So the next issue is scientific evidence. So like in the case of remote work, the scientific evidence supports that remote work is at least as productive and innovative as face-to-face work. How many employers know that? Again, go to Consensus AI, contact your local university. The reports are out there. Actually, I think you can find them in Google Scholar now if that's the easiest for you. Third issue is the idea of stakeholder information and judgment and decisions. The narrowness of being in the C-suite is the stakeholders are often maybe, market related or finance related. And those are critically important. Also maybe government. But there are many stakeholders in the community, in groups within the organization that have interests and concerns that often are neglected because the decision isn't framed in terms of, well, what would be stakeholder concerns about this? So that's a third source. And the last, I'm kind of ending on what I started with, is the idea of practitioner judgment, the judgment of yourself and your own managers or your own technical people. The idea that not every practitioner has thoughtful judgment, trustworthy judgment, and some people you trust because you have a history with them. The issue that I'm thinking about here is practitioners, all of us, are prone to bias, are prone to look for answers the last place we found an answer, prone to frame things narrowly in terms of local interests or the squeaky wheel at the time we're making a decision. Practitioner expertise is a very important aspect of making a quality decision that will stand the test of time. And the issue here is to develop your own expertise in whatever area you're bringing to the decision, but also to have access to people who have not just years of experience, but have proven evidence of making quality decisions in the area that you're seeking information. Because expertise is equal source with organizational data, stakeholder concerns, and science, because these are all relevant to reducing the uncertainty that you face in making a decision and coming up with trustworthy information and a better quality decision. So that would be my strong advice. And if you're looking for more information, the Center for Evidence-Based Management, available to you on the internet. We live on the internet. Can give you pointers for information, readings, trainings, people you could talk with. So
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Rousseau.
thank you, Ekaterina. I enjoyed this. You're a very thoughtful, stimulating interviewer. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. And you're a fantastic expert.